Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Fintech Compliance Chronicles podcast. It's been a while since we've been with you, but today I am very excited to be sitting down with my friend and fellow board member at Little Brothers Friends of the Elderly, Chelsey Krull, who has recently joined a organization called Pindrop, and she is serving as the head of product marketing over there. For those of you who are usual suspects to our space here, you'll be used to us talking about regulations and really getting in the weeds on regulators. But as some of you may also know, risk is a big part of what we do. It's not just compliance. And so, to that effect, security in particular is an area that even in the regulatory space, there's a lot of interest and concern around that, specifically security for consumers who are transacting in this space as well as businesses. So to that end, I am happy to have Chelsey on board with us to talk a little bit about Pindrop and just the space of consumer transactions with organizations and interactions, I should say, with organizations. So with that, Chelsey, I'll turn it over to you. Please introduce yourself. Let us know a little bit about yourself, how you came to Pindrop, a little bit about Pindrop, etc.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. And so, yeah, we do kind of go way back, as you mentioned. I forgot we have all of these inroads, including the Kellogg connection as well. But just to answer your question, Zarek, I joined Pindrop about 6 weeks ago. So relatively new. It's been absolutely just kind of astounding to get on the ground here and in the weeds of just how serious and frankly fast growing this problem really is. But I was previously at AWS, Amazon Web Services, in the AI category. So I started in Kubernetes and then shifted over to AI and was really working with the developer audience in how to kind of make developers more productive with the software development lifecycle, and decided that, my passion was definitely AI, but I wanted to merge kind of my passion for AI, my really deep marketing expertise, and my knowledge of financial services. And Pindrop was kind of the perfect opportunity by which to do that. So this opportunity sort of presented itself. And so I've been here for about the past 6 weeks, as you mentioned, the head of product marketing. So if it would be useful, I can give you a little bit of background on who Pindrop is and what they do as well.
Sure, I think that would be great.
Yeah, so specifically, Pindrop was founded in 2011, which, if you think about that, it actually goes, quite a ways back from when the whole AI wave really kicked off. So really, you can think about Pindrop as a pioneer in, I would say, voice security and authentication as well. So if you have, as an organization, right, a call center for any reason, that could certainly be retail. Primarily, though, at this moment, the primary use case is in the call center of financial institutions. So if you're, banking with E-Trade, or frankly, if your investments are with E-Trade, or for example, Chase, these are not necessarily customers. I'm just giving examples, and you have a need to call in. Our technology can authenticate you for the agent, right? So we look at a variety of different things, and a good way to think about it is it's really comprehensive. So there's a liveness component, and that is really assessing, is this a real human who's calling in? There's additionally a risk component, and that's something that ultimately we can measure as an organization and understand, where is this person calling from in the world? So we kind of make that assessment. There's also a device component. We're looking at, what is the thing that you're calling from? Because as it turns out, that's really important, right? If someone is spoofing another individual, it is definitely something that they use to create, confusion for the agent. And then additionally, there's the behavior component. So what are the things that you do? We're looking at, we call them utterances, or, the way in which this person is speaking. It turns out human beings are really bad at assessing if someone is using a real voice or a synthetic voice. And then lastly, we are also looking at the voice. So, what is it that, something that you are really, and I would say those components are merged together for a really in-depth, comprehensive analysis that Pindrop uses to help the call center agent understand, is this a real human being or is it a synthetic voice being used?
Mm. That's really interesting, because I think so for the audience, and you may be aware as well, I've spent some time working at financial institutions in the past that have significant call center presence. And this was pre-Gen AI, but one of the things that they did to validate that the person was who they say they were was simply going through certain metrics that you would just expect are so sensitive that the only person that could possibly have them would be the individual themselves. Like, oh yeah, give me the last four your social, and then the last the 16 digit of the card,
Yeah.
and maybe mother's maiden name.
Yep.
So I think what we're saying is that having those is no longer enough.
Right.
Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah. So it's a couple of things, right? It's no longer enough, but it's also that there's a way to provide a more efficient and frankly quality experience for an individual that is real, right? So that individual can bypass all of these things that you're talking about because they've already been authenticated. So I was just making a phone call earlier today. I won't say the name of the credit card company, right? But I was trying to call in and I had to verify like 25 different things. In reality, it was 3. But I kept sort of miskeying things. And the reality is I've called into this company many times. They have verified me many, many times. Why do I have to do that over and over and over again? I should be authenticated, right? And if they had Pindrop's technology, they would know that it's me, and I could just sort of immediately bypass all of that. So it does authenticate and help, alleviate fraud that's taking place. And I'll give you an idea in a minute just how massive the problem is. But it would also enable your customers, your real customers who are real people, not using a synthetic voice, not trying to commit fraud, enable them to get through to you very quickly. And that is also really important.
Mm. No, that's helpful, because I think like one thing that has come across that I've come across a lot, and this is getting a little bit into the compliance space, is this whole balance between, hey, we want to obviously protect the business, protect the customers, but at
Right.
the same time, we also don't want to. I think that, as the saying goes, right, we don't want to create this false positive scenario where we're actually going overboard and we're blocking out legitimate people, which then if you're a regulator, you see too much of that, you say, well, actually, this is the whole like intersection between fraud risk versus regulatory risk, which sometimes they're not always on the same page. It's the more you think you're protecting the business and blocking potential fraudsters, the more risk you have that you're actually shutting out legitimate consumers. So I think what you're saying is that with the technology that Pindrop offers, it's actually saving and creating a more efficient time-based experience for those folks that are legitimate. And potentially, maybe this can go into what you're going to talk about in terms of sizing the problem. Maybe it's going to help minimize some of those false positives as opposed to maybe more traditional approaches. You care to comment on that?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The opportunity is to mitigate both, right? And I think sometimes you'll find that a technology or a particular provider is just trying to identify the deep fake, whereas Pindrop, and frankly, where the technology needs to be is such that it's enabling a better experience for your existing customers, because that's a really important contingent, right? And as well, it is sussing out, who is trying to commit fraud.
Mm. Well, that's really helpful. Can you just, in terms of like some of the trends or statistics? I mean, can you
Yeah,
talk about what like the call center space in general,
right.
particularly for financial services, like what are you or what is Pindrop seeing as something that, like in terms of sizing the problem, that it feels that it can come
Yeah.
in to help?
Yeah, so I can give you a few, I would say, very compelling, sometimes it feels like terrifying stats. So, one of the things I said earlier, I believe a huge reason why the call center has been sort of highlighted is largely because, today the defense mechanism that is in place, in addition to sort of OTP and all of the other sort of things that we talked about earlier, is really the call center agent, right? So you have this one human being that is meant to kind of suss out what's happening. Is this real? Is this not? Is this fraud? Is this not, right? That's a huge onus on a human being to try to figure out if a call is authentic or not. So just to give you a sense for kind of the size of the problem, there's been a 400 and let's see, there's been a 60% increase in the amount of fraud coming into voice channels just in the past year. And I would say in the first 4 months of this year, so the first 4 months of 2024, there's been a 450% increase in AI attacks. So that is massive. And then if you couple that with the fact that it has never been easier to clone someone's voice, right? This is a topic I would say that's starting to really pick up steam. I'm not sure though that businesses necessarily fully understand the scope of it. But if you think about the AI tools that have proliferated to enable this very easy voice cloning, I'll just give you an example. So at the end of last year, there were 120 of these voice cloning apps. And as of, I think it was by March this year, there are now almost 400. So I think the number is 358. So when you think about the fact that it has never been easier to clone someone's voice, as well as what we were kind of talking about earlier, the amount of times your information, my information has been stolen, right? I just got another letter this past week from my daughter's hospital. Once again, a security breach, your information has been hacked. Here's all the things we're doing. Great. Well, now, the fraudster has all of the necessary information to bypass on the stuff we were talking about earlier, as well as my voice, right? And it's really, it is frankly just that simple to bypass a call center agent, because now you have sort of all the details that you need to call in and access someone's personal account.
Mm. Yeah, that's it is very scary to think that folks can simply clone voices, and that's that. I guess my question for you would be, from a perspective of Pindrop, um, like in terms of like the types of organizations you partner with, maybe this is an opportunity for you to maybe share a little bit of the company's pitch when you look for partnership. What sort of organizations would Pindrop seeking to partner with? Because obviously call
Mhm.
centers, as you talked about, right, are prevalent and used by a lot of industries, but we're seeing this increasing trend, at least from my view, that unfortunately a lot of fintechs in particular are trying to automate customer service, and it's just not it's not really doing the customer any favors.
Right.
I think I'm an advocate of the more interactive customer service you can have, the better it's going to be for your customers, and it is an investment, right? But
Yes.
I think it's an investment that ultimately will help your business succeed because they actually come across as meaningful in a time where everything just seems to be automated. So, from your perspective, uh, what kind of organizations do you look to partner with as Pindrop, right? And I know you talked about a broad level, but just in terms
Yeah.
of like maybe profile, size, etc.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, I can give you a sense for who we work with today, and I think that helps kind of frame not necessarily an ideal customer, but certainly one that makes sense for the solution. Would be today we work with, I think it's 8 of the top of 10 top 10 banks. So those financial institutions, individuals who certainly hold some really personal, important information for individuals, as well as 5 of the top 10 insurance companies. And in addition to that, we're really starting to see, I don't know if an uptick is the right word, but certainly an interest from healthcare as well as retail. So something that's really interesting trend that is happening in retail is return fraud. So
Mm,
fraudsters calling in to try to make returns on something that is not actually real, right? So they're just looking to get money back. That is a huge problem for retail, and then healthcare, right? There's so much PII that is housed in these organizations, and there is such a huge massive need for this type of a service. I mean, I think about any time I call in to my doctor, which they make it so hard these days to do so, it's almost like they want to deter you from doing that. But the barrier for entry and to bypass, the person who, I don't even really have to answer that many questions, right? So you think about the amount of information that they access and hold, and how easy it is to kind of get past and speak with someone about my own personal information is really not that hard. So the majority of the customers, again, kind of banks, financial institutions, insurance companies as well. And then, we're starting to see sort of this increase around healthcare and retail.
mm. And maybe without getting too much into the nitty-gritty technical details, but uh, just a bit of background on, how exactly does the product work from a perspective of, hey, like,
Yeah.
here's the institution, here's the customer, where does Pindrop come
Yeah.
in? So, like, maybe just give an example, right, of an interaction. Like, let's say I'm calling uh, my bank, and my bank happens to use Pindrop. So, just with that as a starting
Yeah.
point, give me an idea of how Pindrop kind of fits in.
Yeah, great question. So it's funny because you will really have no idea, right, as the
Of course.
customer, that Pindrop is doing its job, so to speak. Essentially, all the things that I referenced earlier, the sort of liveness, the risk, the device, the behavior, and the voice, all of those things are being assessed in real time in a matter of seconds. So when you're calling in and having this conversation with the agent, or frankly, maybe you've been validated already. Typically, what's happening is the technology is reviewing all these different components that I referenced earlier, and it is showing a score to the agent as they are on the phone with you. Yes, the likelihood that this is a real person is very high, and it puts that in a category. Or no, actually, we believe this is synthetic because of all the different things we're picking up on. So really, from an agent perspective, it's pretty straightforward. And then typically what happens is the agent will say something like, I'm not able to verify you, right? Based on the what they're seeing on their screen, this has been identified as a deep fake or a synthetic voice. And they basically say, we'd like for you to come in, whether it's to the branch or what have you, in person, or I'm not able to verify you, I need to pass you along, at which point they're usually sending them to some type of an additional call center or a specific area of the business that specializes in that type of fraud. And that person's being moved, off the agent and deeper and needing more assessment, so to speak.
Mm. Oh, that's interesting. And then just in terms of like integration with other like software, right? So from
Yeah,
my understanding slash recollection from when I used to audit call centers, you had obviously the dialer system to intake calls. Then you obviously have the customer servicing tool that is in front of them. And
right.
then, as you mentioned, right, there's Pindrop. There may be other fraud tools running in the background. that an agent can see. Um, how well or how seamlessly can Pindrop integrate with some of these other parts of the call experience, right? And is it,
Yeah.
I guess maybe as a follow up, obviously Gen AI is mostly we're talking about here is voice related transactions, but to the extent that let's say somebody has like an institution maybe is doing some transactions like with text only, is Pindrop like only focusing on voice interactions, or does it get to the level of, hey, like, for organizations, for example, that don't do voice-based servicing, but they
Right.
do like, written servicing, maybe a
Right.
chat, etc. Can it
Right.
get to that level?
Yeah,
It's a
no,
two-part question. Sorry.
no, it's okay. I'll take the second one first. So you're absolutely right. There are organizations that, for better or for worse, they sort of go out of their way to ensure that you don't call them. I unfortunately have been the recipient of several of those. We today we're just audio. What comes in the future, is sort of TBD. But right now, that is our area of focus. That is where, we are the experts.
I appreciate you sharing that. Maybe just thinking a little bit more broadly, um, thinking about the industry. So our listeners, readers, viewers will know the biggest story in the space right now is Evolve Bank and Trust and Synapse, where we are talking about organization, a fintech that went bankrupt, and then there's consumers who are caught in the middle because the partner bank that bankrupt organization works with cannot seem to be able to reconcile the customer accounts that they were partnering with said fintech to service. And now the piece that's relevant to this conversation is that that partner bank has now been subject to a data breach slash hack, where these already impacted consumers' information is now not only not accessible but has been lost and accessible to hackers. So just putting that out there because the space is certainly um, not facing any reduction in threats. I think threats are
Right.
rising more and more, whether they're Gen AI, whether they're data breaches, etc. So as someone who works for an organization that is trying to make a difference in the space, I mean, what hope slash uh, best practices do you think consumers can have with everything that is happening, right? As I think we talked about at one point, I think everybody's information, whether they like it or not, has probably been part of a data breach.
Mhm.
But what is the best that we as average consumers, users of this technology, customers of these fintechs, what can we do? Because certainly from a regulatory perspective, yeah, there's laws and there's certain things that regulations can do, but many cases regulations come after or sometimes even as a result of
Right.
impact to consumers.
Yeah.
So what recourse do consumers have with all this rise in threats, and what is the best or maybe some basic things that folks can do, especially with generative AI being thrown in the mix?
I know. That's such a great question, right? Because it's sort of it asking that I remove my pin drop hat and just respond as an individual, right? I mean, but when you think about good AI versus bad AI, at Pindrop a really excellent example of how you can fight bad AI with good AI, right? And you can fight kind of a bad actor with really, really good tech that can suss out some of this really negative behavior that's going on. But that's an example of one company that's doing its part to try to alleviate this burden that feels like it's just growing exponentially, right? And what I would not necessarily do as a consumer is put the onus on the organization, right? What I think we should start demanding is that our companies or the organizations with whom we do business with have these protections in place, right? And speak up when it's clear that they're not. It's become so normalized to like I said, I got a letter just the other day in the mail that my information, was compromised. That happens all the time, right? Whether it's an email or a letter. I think as consumers, we need to get louder on the fact that this is not okay, so that organizations like a Pindrop or whomever else is out there trying to detect this nefarious behavior will become the norm, right? And that will just be an expectation. Because to your point, the regulations tend to be a bit of a lag in that regard. I think at some point there will be no choice in this matter. But for now, we have to do everything we can to speak up and try to change that.
Yeah, and I would just add to that is I think even though in the case example I gave with Evolve and Synapse, they haven't necessarily acted themselves. I think the CFPB complaint database is another great resource I would suggest that folks can leverage. Where, look, the CFPB didn't respond, but the Federal Reserve Board, FRB, they actually did, and they called out Evolve. Granted, it wasn't specifically for anything around what ended up being a data breach, but at least it may be no small comfort to a consumer who's just trying to get access to the 20,000 or 30,000 that is in limbo that they haven't been able to get access to for a month. But at least it gives somewhat of an indication that somebody is trying to do something. And so we have these vehicles. I think the Better Business Bureau,
Yep.
using that as a leverage can also be a tool. Well, Chelsey, any closing thoughts or just points you'd like to share with our audience today?
Closing thoughts. No, I mean, I want to say thanks for having me. This has been such an interesting discussion, and really, I guess the last thing I'll say to your question about how can we as consumers, kind of combat what's happening and what frankly is only going to proliferate even more exponentially, I think, than it already has, is just getting educated, right? And sort of understanding what's out there. And then you start to know, like, this is actually not a way that my bank should be trying to authorize me, right? And I think the smarter we can get, the more intelligent we can get about what these things are, what purposes they serve. Not be an expert, but just be aware of them can also be a really useful tool to protect yourself.
Yeah, I think that's knowledge is power. And I think we can all use some of that as we face these threats. Well, Chelsey, it's been a real pleasure talking to you and learning more about Pindrop and what you're doing and just exchanging perspectives. So would love to have you back as you spend some more time and maybe do a round two. But thank
Yeah,
you so much for your time. Really enjoyed the conversation.
thank you. Likewise.
And thanks everybody for listening. Appreciate you tuning in.